You're listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. All right, welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Beaudry. With me today, I have my good friend and co-host, John Matola. How are you doing, John?
Hi-yo. I'm good.
All right. If you want to keep up to date on the show, you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcatcher. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell for notifications. I guess it's below there somewhere if you're watching. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Links to all that are at deeppurplepodcast.com. You can also contact us at info@deeppurplepodcast.com. And if you'd like to hear more of what you're hearing right now and all of this nonsense, please become a patron on Patreon. And if you want to help new people discover the show, the best way is to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. We've got a few ratings up there already, so thank you for everyone up there, particularly the people that aren't related to us or married to us, who who were kind enough to leave. So yeah, how are you doing?
Very well. Excellent. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
So we wanted to talk in this episode about an era of Deep Purple that neither of us are very familiar with. Just did a little research on some of the musical projects that the original lineup of Deep Purple were involved in before they formed Deep Purple. So we're talking early to mid to late 60s stuff, which we discussed on the last episode is not really our cup of tea these days.
Yeah, not the most exciting.
Not necessarily. I think it's before a lot of bands really hit their strides if you listen to any of the early works of what musicians were doing at that point. And I know you're not a big fan of the Beatles, but listening to the Beatles production values and then jumping to a band that's contemporary to them in the mid 60s is kind of alarming, because whatever you feel about the Beatles music, they were light years beyond anyone else as far as music production goes. And these songs we're going to be listening to are not necessarily. They sound like the kind of oldies station stuff that we might have heard our parents playing.
Yeah, like I was saying before, this kind of stuff sounds very dated. Mm-hmm. Even I agree with you about the Beatles. They were never really my favorite, but you can't deny that they did have good production values, better than the other bands anyway. It's probably they probably had like more backing or financial backing, maybe.
Well, yeah, they certainly weren't struggling for money, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, even like I don't know their history that well, but even their early albums, and of course, if you listen to it now, they've probably had all the benefits of getting remastered and all that good stuff. Whereas this stuff is probably recorded off old 45s, and who knows, you know.
Totally. Yeah, I think everything we're going to be listening to is today is mostly from, like you said, old 45s and things that were some of them are from TV shows and things like that. Just record. I don't know where they even got these recordings from, but I tried to, get a decent selection of some songs and things from the different acts that these guys were involved with. Some of them I'd heard of for years and years and just never actually bothered listening to their music. Some of them are kind of new to me. So it'll be interesting to hear what was going on. So the original lineup for Deep Purple, of course, was, the three people that everyone obviously knows: Ritchie Blackmore on guitar, Ian Pace on drums, and John Lord on keyboards. And they also played with Nick Simper on bass and Rod Evans on vocals. And all of those guys kind of intertwined in some way or another before Deep Purple, before they actually formed. And they were originally formed as the group Roundabout,
Right.
backed by like some sort of millionaire or something, had backed the band.
Really.
And yeah, and the idea of Roundabout was it'd be this rotating cast of musicians, and they just enter and leave like a roundabout. Like you'd get on and then they'd get off, and then a new guy would get on, and which didn't end up being too far from the truth of
Mhm.
what actually happened. But that was kind of the idea. And that guy, we can get more into that later if we want to, but that guy and eventually just didn't end up being involved with the band anymore, and they kind of went their own way. So
Oops. So you've heard some of this stuff then?
hmm
Okay.
I've listened to some of it, and some of it
Okay.
I just I got all the clips all ready, and I maybe only listened to a few seconds of some of them. But I just want to play each one for each individual act, see what
Okay.
we think or take on it. And I think the interesting thing is listening to how we can hear, oh, that sounds very John Lord, or that sounds very Ian Pace, or whatever it is, listening to
Yeah.
just like we talked about last week with the earlier Deep Purple albums. You can hear these little flashes that sound like the Deep Purple that were more established later in the group's history.
Okay, and to make it clear to our listener, to make it clear to our two listeners,
we're up
I
to,
haven't
we're up
heard.
to
I haven't heard
17 last I checked.
17 to our 17 listeners. I haven't heard any of this stuff before, so at least not to my knowledge, or if I have, it's been a long time. So this is going to be my fresh reactions to it.
I think it would be safe to say you haven't heard any of this.
Okay, okay.
I definitely, until I started kind of just putting together some of these clips for today's episode, again, I'd heard of these bands, some of them, most of them, but I'd never heard any of their actual stuff. Just
Okay.
never really, honestly, was never really interested to check it out. But
Yeah.
for the sake of completion and kind of getting a good feel for where this is all at, I wanted to get a sense of it. So
Okay, folks, my honest reactions. Here we go.
so the first group is called The Outlaws, and this was Ritchie Blackmore only on guitar, and this is from 1964.
Whoa.
Mick Underwood was on this as well, who would also later be part of Episode 6 and would work with the band Gillan, not
Mhm.
just Ian Gillan. And there were a lot of past members of this band, the Outlaws, that kind of came and went throughout the band's history. And Ian Gillan was there for a brief time. I'm sorry, Ritchie Blackmore was there for a brief time. Weird story that the producer who was kind of the backup, the guy for this producer was named Joe Meek. He had produced all of these bands, like some of whom you may have heard of, like looking through this, there's just a Petula Clark. I know my dad used to have like Petula Clark albums.
Yeah.
All of these different bands, like tons and tons of bands this guy had recorded, but he ended up somehow, like the landlady who was responsible for the studio, like he and her got into an altercation or something, and he shot her and killed himself.
Jesus.
Yeah, I don't know. I looked just briefly before the episode about like why or what happened. He was only 37, I guess.
Wow.
I don't know what happened, what preceded that. I saw there's a few documentaries on the BBC about him from like the early 90s, so we're not going to probably find those, but interesting backstory piece there. So, but in happier times, he recorded The Outlaws.
When he wasn't killing people, he was recording The Outlaws.
He was recording The Outlaws, and this song right here, which we're going to start up, is a song called Law and Order. It features a young Richie Blackmore there. Now, can you hear that okay? No,
Yeah, it's a little soft, but
it's a little soft, but I almost think you don't need to hear it just to see Richie Blackmore there on the left dancing. To think of, can you imagine what it would take in like the mid 70s to get Richie Blackmore to dance like that? So I don't know what they.
well, wow, look at him. These guys look like these guys look really young. Like they look like
Yes.
they got to be in high school in this.
Yeah, well, Richie Blackmore would have had to be in his late teens or early 20s at the
What is
oldest.
this, 64, you said?
64. This guy is playing a little steel, little slide guitar there. It appears to be just 3 guitars and a drummer.
I can, and that thing.
Yeah, like the. I guess
Whoa.
it's a steel. I think it's a slide guitar. I don't think it's not a pedal steel guitar. It's just a slide guitar. I just can't get over. I mean, you can tell it's Richie there on the left, but the dance
Oh my
just gets me every time.
It's
And she, short and to the point there. A minute and 47 seconds song.
yeah, and it sounded. I don't know who was. I couldn't really tell who was playing the lead or whatever, but it kind of sounded. I kind of heard some Richie in there.
Yeah, definitely. It's I know he got he played a bit with some like country acts at some point too, and he was kind of did that little picking thing with the guitar. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if it was some of the melody in there sounded like later Richie. I don't know if it was him playing or if he might have just picked it up with the guys that he was playing with, but I could kind of catch the little bit of melody in there that sounded like stuff that, when you were talking about hearing those flashes in there, I don't know what it sounds like, but it sounds like something he did, probably like a lick or something in there somewhere in a later song or,
Right. He played a lot with I know you probably remember the name Screaming Lord Sutch.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find anything by Screaming Lord Sutch that wasn't completely insane to play. And reading up on all of these stories about how he would chase the bandmates around on the stage with an axe and things like that, and like it seemed that like Richie Blackmore was legitimately afraid of him, which you would be if somebody's chasing you with an axe. So
I would be, yeah.
I found one video and I studied it for a while trying to think. I couldn't tell if the guitarist was Richie or not, so I didn't want to play it not knowing. I couldn't find any real proof, but Screaming Lord Sutch had, it seems like, 100 different people in his band at different times, so it was hard to, Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages and Screaming Lord Sutch and the whatever, like he had 100 different lineups, so I couldn't really tell what was what.
Yeah.
So I kind of skipped over that era,
Yeah.
which brings us to the next band, which is MI5. And MI5, it has Rod Evans on vocals and Ian Pace on drums.
Cool.
And evidently when Rod Evans went to Deep Purple, they had another drummer. And Rod Evans said, "Oh, I know a drummer who's better," and brought Ian in, and that's kind of how it went. So,
and he wasn't wrong.
He was not wrong. Yeah, I mean, I don't know this other drummer, but it's hard. There aren't many drummers that are rock drummers that are much better than Ian Pace. He's pretty highly regarded. So they toured like in Germany, which seemed to be what like every English band did. They just went across, or toured Germany. And they did some Italian show. They did some singles, I guess, in Italy and in France, which I think is what we're going to listen to. One of those French or English singles. And Yeah, they I guess Ian Pace, I don't know if Rod Evans must have as well, but Ian Pace met Richie Blackmore on the boat going over to Germany because Richie was going over in another band with another band to play in Germany as well. So they kind of met for the first time there, and that's where they kind of forged their early friendship. So this first song by MI5, which I'm assuming is a take on MI6,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know why it seems like they should have named it MI7, because it's like we're better than MI6, but it's like MI5 are not quite as good as. I don't know. I don't know if that was the thinking, but anyway, they weren't around for too long.
Mm.
But this is a song called "You'll Never Stop Me Loving You," and this has, of course, Ian Pace on drums and Rod Evans on guitar. So let's get that started up. Let's see here. All right. Very Rod Evans-y.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I've heard this.
You have?
Yeah, this was like on the Deep Purple Family Album CD that I got a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
I have heard this. I always liked this one. I like this song.
Well, it's a very polished sounding song with that really deep, rich reverb on his voice, and sounds like a pop song from
And I like his voice. I think he's a good kind of crooner.
Yeah. I was just gonna say crooner.
I like stuff like this.
Yes, he's a good singer. It does make you kind of wonder why he was exited from the band, like what the real backstory was there. I mean, I've read stories and things, but he seemed to it would have been a very different future for Deep Purple had he stayed on, but he's a very good singer.
Yeah, I don't think that he had the edge that they were looking for. I think that was some of the stories that I've heard about him is that it was he couldn't take them to places like Ian Gillan did. I mean, their voices are like completely different.
Right. I think Richie seems, in all the interviews I've seen with him, seems to have a very distinct idea of what he wants for the style and the look and how they need to act as a singer and things. And I could see him just saying, like, you're not, you need to wear the leather jacket and you need to be aggressive. And, I reading a lot of things but like he feuded with like Graham Bonnet and stuff, because Graham Bonnet would get a haircut and he'd get all mad that he was too clean cut and too clean shaven for Rainbow. So
oh my God,
I saw something an interview with him where he was talking about how they tried to lock him in a room before a show so he wouldn't get a haircut, but he snuck out the window and got a haircut.
Oh, that's too good.
Which sounds like something Richie, I won't go on until dusk sort of situation. He has to have the setting has to be right, but
I feel like Richie Blackmore has the most like childish stories. Like you listen to, you're like, is this Richie Blackmore or like a 7-year-old's? It's like.
Yeah, it sounds like me trying to negotiate with my children about you have to eat, like, well, I need the green plate because the green's my favorite color. I can't eat off the yellow plate.
Yeah, you know what? You should make a segment like My Kids or Richie Blackmore, and then just tell stories and have me guess which one is true.
That is actually a really good idea.
You'd be I won't go outside until dusk. My 5-year-olds, no, wrong.
Yeah, if you just kind of replaced the scenario or whatever the proper nouns are in the story with something else, I think that could make a really good segment.
You know what I was thinking of too, when talking about some of the stories of how they needed somebody with a harder edge or something. It kind of made me think of Iron Maiden a little bit, how when they went from, two drastically different singers, they had Paul Di'Anno on two really good albums. Was it one or two albums?
I'm not sure. I'm not that well versed in Iron
Eh,
Maiden.
I am a little bit, but it's a completely different singer than Bruce Dickinson, who was like the first guy kind of had that basic like rock voice, not a screamer at all, no kind of didn't really hit those high notes or anything. And then Bruce Dickinson, completely different, and like took them to what they became. And even though it's two completely different bands, it's to me the scenario always kind of lined up. It was the same thing as Rod Evans being that kind of crooner, and then Ian being able to just be really wild, just like hit those really high notes. And he had the long hair and that really 70s like front man, good looks, everything like that. Like two completely different guys. But I bet if Rod Evans stuck with this kind of band, or if Deep Purple went in that direction, I don't know if they would have been as big, but I think he was good at what he was doing.
I think he's a great singer, and yeah, it's such a hard thing replacing a singer in a band. I mean, you can when you replace the guitarist or the bassist or the drummer, I mean, yeah, you're like really hardcore fans are going to notice, but fans that aren't musicians or fans that aren't really huge fans probably wouldn't even know the names of those guys to begin with. Even people at the concert, some of the people at the concerts. But when you start to replace a vocalist, it's just, I mean, it's not. I mean, even when you look at like, when Dio took over for Ozzy, I mean, on paper, Dio is a better singer than Ozzy by a long shot.
Oh,
but
yeah.
He could, but listening to him do the Ozzy songs is just unbearable. I love Dio, but I just the phrasing of everything was just
they awful. Weren't. Yeah, they're not for him. It's almost like, without disrespecting the early Sabbath stuff, it wasn't his stuff was much. He was a better songwriter, I think, or a different kind of songwriter. Like that stuff was almost like he was too advanced for it. Like you needed more of you needed Ozzy for those songs, or just anybody, but not Dio, because Dio could just like soar and do anything he wanted and was just great at it. But if you tried to like bring him down to like, maybe too simplistic or something like that, it wasn't. I think I might have heard him do like War Pigs, like he would do like War Pigs or Paranoid, and I'm just like, I mean, it's like, I love Dio, but it doesn't sound that great.
Well, it like the voice sounds great, but to me, it was all the phrasing was off. Like it wasn't following the same meter. Kind of like when the first time I heard like the Jesus Christ Superstar movie, I was like, oh, what's he doing? It's not following the right rhythm. Ted Neely and is it Carl Anderson?
Yeah.
The first time I really didn't like it. And then, I just kept listening to it. Then I grew to kind of like the movie as an alternative version of the performance. But it took a while to grow on me. And it's when you're not following those direct rhythms that you're used to listening to the album, But we've got another song from MI5, which is Only Time Will Tell. And these are all kind of coming from YouTube, so some of the videos are a little kind of wonky, but this is the Only Time Will Tell.
And this is Ian Paice and Rod Evans?
Yep. What's interesting here, though, is kind of background vocals. And there you go. Chris Banham on organ, Eric Keane on bass, Roger Lewis on guitar, and Ian Paice on drums, of course.
I can't even tell who Ian Paice is.
I think he's the guy at the bottom, crouched in the middle between the two guys. Before he started wearing his standard issue glasses. It's very hard to tell when he's not wearing those glasses. Like,
yeah.
He could walk by you on the street without those glasses and you wouldn't recognize him if he had those glasses on. It's Ian Paice. Rod Evans must be that big guy in the back.
Like, who's that big galoot in the back?
Yeah,
It looks like Chris Novoselic from Nirvana or something.
yeah, he's like towering over. I don't know if it's just the way they're leaning on that tree or what, but yeah, he's got a really good voice for this kind of thing. Oh, there is Ian Payne,
Whoa!
18 years
Wow.
old. You
Look
can
at
kinda
that.
see-
Doesn't even look like him.
He doesn't look 18 in that picture. He looks like 12.
Yeah. Wow.
Pretty. But you know, this one's got a pretty good groove to it. It's got pretty good little harmony vocal going on there, and it's
yeah, it's definitely, again, that kind of dated 60s, especially with those backing vocals type of feel to it. But I tell you, like the effects on Rod Evans' vocals and everything, he's got that really, I always thought he had a full, rich voice.
yeah. Ooh, a little stab at the end there. It's
I enjoy it.
yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, you know, it's interesting thinking that, you know, Ian Pace and Rod Evans were in that band and kind of got recruited over to Deep Purple.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd like blast it in my car.
It's a good piece of history.
Try and try and make people think I'm cool with it. You know, just roll up and be like, "What's up?" Time will tell. Like, nope.
Let's get out of here. This guy's crazy.
That's what most people say about me anyway. Oh, wah wah.
So the next is by a band. We listened to this in the warm up just to test our levels. So Sundragon. The band was called Sundragon, and this
That's a cool
featured.
name.
So this is like almost Deep Purple. It's Richie Blackmore on guitar, Ian Pace on drums, and John Lord on keyboards, who are backing Rob Freeman and Ian McClintock. And I probably should have done the research. I don't know which one was singing and which one was playing bass.
Mm.
But, you know, it's kind of like they were kind of the precursor to Rod Evans and Nick Simper. And very interesting piece about this band, which I never knew, is they were managed by Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles.
Wow.
Which is hard to imagine. Obviously, he didn't spend as much time with Sundragon as he did with the Beatles for you know, obvious reasons. So yeah, they were managed by Brian Epstein, and just kind of they did this one album, and then they just broke up. It just wasn't going anywhere. But this song is called it's called Five White Horses. Like I said, we listened to this in the preview here, and here we go. Kind of getting a little this reminds me of I'm sure you haven't seen this show, Jake and the Neverland Pirates.
I have not.
It's a kid's cartoon, and my kids used to watch it when they were little.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a band that will break out into a song at the end of every episode, like these two live action guys, and all their music sounds exactly like this. So I don't know if they were big Sundragon fans or what, but I was using this song to get my levels even before we were talking, and I'm kind of starting to really dig this album or this song. It's from 1968.
You know, I'm also wondering too, if I thought when you played this before that this was Rod Evans on vocals.
Right, yep.
So I'm wondering if Rod Evans sounded that distinctive because they just used the same vocal effects on this guy and him, or if they used the same vocal effects, because he's got kind of that, you know, the echo and the doubling effect.
Well, listen to this guitar solo.
Oh, that's definitely...
Yeah. Very short, but a very brief little glimpse into some early Richie playing there, which sounds very distinctive.
Oh, yeah, it definitely sounds like he would wind up sounding
And
later.
it is possible they were using the same studio as all these other bands. Everything was very incestuous back then, which is why there's so many of these people involved with Deep Purple. All of them are just intertwined and, you know, playing in different bands together. And it's got some really good early effects on it too. There sounds kind of like they're almost like they were shaking the tube amp and to get that effect.
Now, they didn't write this on their own, right?
Well, it says here James and Freeman, so I don't know if that's referring to well, Freeman is we'll say potentially the Freeman is potentially the singer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just wondering that because, like I had mentioned before, that whole Snake Charmer vibe sounds like something Richie would have wrote, you know, do 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 do.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, that's Richie. There he is. But either that or maybe they were drawn to it because it kind of had that vibe or melody to it. I don't know, or they added it to it if it was a cover.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, well, it sounds like it was written by somebody in the band. Who exactly I don't know.
Yeah.
But, so another song by them is the song "Green Tambourine." So this is the album.
Who are these guys?
That's the Ian Gillan and Roger Glover of this early version of Deep Purple.
And they put them on the cover?
You can hear some nice piano work going there. So yeah, it's
A little whimsical John Lord there.
It's just funny seeing these. It's funny to think of Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, and John Lord backing up these virtually unknown people now,
Mm-hmm.
and they did it in many bands. It also makes you wonder how strong would these songs have been without that amazing backing band.
This could have been literally anybody.
Right.
Like
even some horns and strings going on there too.
Like, I hear a little whimsical John Lord going on there.
Yeah, and you don't hear John Lord playing a lot of piano in anything having to do with Deep Purple. It was always going to be organs or some of those early 70s synths.
But I mean, the drums, that could have been anybody. That's not screaming in Pace to me.
No.
This is the man who would later on write the drum part to The Mule.
Yeah. I could definitely hear some influence coming from this song. I think of him playing Fireball or that 11-minute drum solo in Copenhagen or whatever. But I definitely would like to give this whole album a listen at a later point, because it is very interesting from a historical standpoint. Band Sundragon, which up until pretty recently I don't think I'd ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, again, this is stuff that I probably would listen to once, like now, and not anymore. Not that it's bad, it's just not my cup of tea.
No. And yeah, like we talked about, like another, band I really love is Pink Floyd, but the first album really is tough for me to listen to. I everything after that I really like, but that first album is just, I can't remember the exact year, but it was probably 66 or 67. And it's just very like singing with those heavy British accents before they were trying to, pretend to be American or whatever. Everyone started, losing their accents where they were singing, and just, You know, every song just kind of sounds like, you know, I'm going to the mailbox, get more mail. And it's like all very like, you know, I don't know. I don't even know how to just very like kind of lame.
Yeah, that's the best way to
And they,
describe it.
you know, they have very much similar beginnings to Deep Purple. They just had a couple of like stuff, like a couple of things like that, and then boom, all of a sudden started putting out these incredibly well produced, well written, thought out albums with 17-minute songs and all this really intricate stuff going on. So it's funny how they could kind of elevate themselves from like this like almost skiffle to early rock and roll to being these huge bands in the 70s.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about some bands like that, just Deep Purple or Pink Floyd. For me, like even though there's not a lot of early release material by them, early Kiss, who's still one of my favorites. Just listening to some of that early early 70s or late 60s, early 70s stuff, it's just so like you wonder where did that change happen, where the chemistry happened between these people, or like the light went off, or I mean, I'm sure it didn't happen overnight, but it's just one day you have like albums like this or songs that sound like this, and then the next day or the next album it's like totally different.
Right.
From like Deep Purple 1969 to In Rock, and
Yeah.
it's how did that even happen? They helped invent a genre basically.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
where was that metal like a year or two before? Because it's basically like it's just a wild album, which I don't want to talk too much about it because
Yeah, wait, save it for that
I want
episode.
to save it for that. But you know what
Well,
I'm talking about. It's like you're going
sure.
from these a few short years before, and then before you know it, it's basically invent like heavy rock.
Right. And Pink Floyd went from this their first Piper at the Gates of Dawn thing. That's the name of the album. So they went from that album to I think Saucer Full of Secrets, or was the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like you could still hear in that second album where they were coming from in that first album, but it had like changed to the point where it's like something I would never really put on other than from a isn't that interesting thing to like, wow, I listened to this in
Yeah.
one album. And Deep Purple kind of had a buffer with the concerto because
Mm-hmm.
it was this weird bridge, like all of a sudden, okay, we're putting out a rock album, now we're going to play with the London Philharmonic, and then we're going to put out In Rock. Like what? Like the fact that they were able to keep any fans with that progression is mind-boggling, because that's such a jump. They just jumped all over the place and were constantly reinventing themselves. And they
Think about think about the jumps later on too.
sure, oh yeah, yeah,
Going from Gillan and Glover to Hughes and Coverdale, and then even Tommy Bolin, which I don't know offhand how well Stormbringer and Come Taste the Band were received at the time, but uh, they're phenomenal. They're all phenomenal albums. There's not many Deep Purple albums I don't enjoy from that era.
no, not at all. It's yeah, it's interesting. It goes to show you there's something there that people stuck around through all
Yeah,
those zigs and zags.
but you're right. It is incredible. Yeah.
So for our the next group is called The Maze, which is basically the same band as um, MI5.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing again with Rod Evans on vocals and Ian Pace on drums. And to me, it sounds like a little bit of a departure, though. It sounds a little bit different. But we've got here this song, Telephone. So I think they just basically changed their name. But very, very Rod Evans. 1966, this was.
Oh, a Robert Stigwood production. Interesting.
Do you know Robert Stigwood?
Not personally. I've heard of him. I've heard of him for sure.
Who is he?
The only thing that I remember that him being associated with, if I remember right, was later on down the road, I think producing Saturday Night Fever, the movie.
Oh, okay.
But obviously being around for a while and just being associated with a lot of big names. So either he wasn't big then or this was one of his early projects.
So it says here, Robert Colin Stigwood was an Australian-born British resident music entrepreneur, film producer, and impresario, best known for managing Cream and the Bee Gees.
There we go, Cream and Bee Gees.
And theatrical productions like Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar.
That's where okay, now I remember, yeah.
Extremely successful Grease and Saturday Night Fever. So
there we go.
So yeah, this is
sometimes I remember stuff.
Here I am looking at that name thinking, oh, this was his claim to fame and it was all downhill from here after, but apparently this is not even register for him. Wow.
But the song is pretty decent. Your typical hokey late mid 60s lyrics.
Sure. They're just kind of also reveling in how great it is that they had a telephone.
I know, right?
This is new technology at the time. I know the telephone had been around for a while. I'm just making a joke. I don't want any one of our 17 listeners to write in and say, actually,
the
telephone had been around for quite some time.
Wow. Well, I mean, the 50 years later, their minds would have been blown.
Yeah. What you can
do. Like, cell phone. Yeah. Cell phone. Yeah.
You text me on my cell phone. But yeah, pretty, that almost sounds earlier than the other. I wonder if the Maze was before MI5 or before they changed their name to MI5. But although based on that picture of Ian Pace, I can't imagine it was.
Yeah.
He looked like he was still in 5th grade.
But I feel like a lot of these songs are very, very similar.
Yep.
I mean, that's obvious, but not bad. Just very. I don't know. I feel like Rod Evans doing what Rod Evans does best.
Right. Yeah. It's in. I wonder how does that sound dated to us, but yet, and even the few early Deep Purple things sound dated, but yet in rock, I mean, it sounds of its time, but I guess it depends on how you define the word dated. But it doesn't sound like to me like, oh man, that's just so.
I think a lot of it has to do with production values too. I mean. When I think of the 60s, I think of like heavy reverb. And in terms of production, not even songwriting. Like the songwriting is all like, like that poppy, like bouncy stuff with that kind of rhythm to it or whatever. But like, heavy reverb on pretty much everything. Me and Eric used to call it. I have to divert for a minute. So we would had a phase where we watched some Elvis movies for a little while because.
Oh, I remember we would watch Clambake.
Yep, Clambake. So wait a minute, maybe you remember this.
I remember this Beach Reverb.
We called it Beach Reverb because Elvis would just pull a guitar out of nowhere and start playing, and there would just be this freaking reverb. Like this huge reverb on everything, but he's in the middle of the beach. And I remember Eric he was going, he goes, that's some nice beach reverb he's got going on his guitar there. It's like, how do you get that kind of sound when you're at the beach?
Yeah, it sounds like he's in Carlsbad Cavern, then on the beach. Yeah, he just would reach off screen and then pull out a guitar and just, not even be pretending to play. It's like Elvis, we know you can play the guitar, like at least make some chord. But Elvis would just show up to the studio or whatever, bang out some songs. He probably didn't know how to play the songs on the guitar. He never took the time. He just show up, record his vocals and you guys see you later.
Yeah, bye. I got to do another movie or, whatever he was doing. But yeah, but I think that's kind of weird too, that you could have that same, I guess, kind of production on an Elvis song, or on a, who was this last band?
The Maze.
The Maze song, but for some reason Elvis became bigger, maybe better production, better songs, maybe because he was friggin' Elvis. I
Probably
mean,
had
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure if Rod Evans was somehow became of Elvis status, like if they marketed him, or like he had that same kind of like backstory as Elvis, then maybe it would have transcended the production. But to me, I feel it's that is dated production, as like, but you also have to enjoy that type of music too. Like, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of 70s, and like, especially I hear in the 80s, a lot of like 80s production is very obvious to us because that's when we grew up. So the heavy synthesizer sounds, the reverb that they
there. Yeah.
using of the time at the drums and everything. Of course, I live for that stuff now, but but I mean, some people like listen to it, they're like, "Oh God, it's terrible, it's awful." But I think you have to really love that music or be of that time. So maybe people that were growing up around this time hear that and they feel differently about it. We could probably put this on and they're like, "Oh, this is fantastic, this is great," and they want to listen to it all the time. So,
Well, getting back to the mixing on that, you know, I'm not quite in this era, but probably 10 years before this song was recorded, the mixing was just basically they'd have one microphone and they place it in the room. They put the drummer as far away as they could. They put the piano a little closer, and they put the singer like right up into the microphone, so they would have to like, that was how they recorded things. It wasn't,
wow.
like different tracks or anything.
Mm.
So there's definitely, even at this time, I'm sure they probably had, I know they had 4-track recording, so they were able to manipulate it a little bit more, but they were, the producers for this band were probably not able to utilize that technology to its fullest. And seeing some of the things that they did on some of the Beatles albums, for instance, with 4 tracks is pretty incredible, because
Yeah.
I remember recording with 8 tracks and struggling, 20 years ago, to like, oh my God, I've only got 8 tracks. And my equipment probably wasn't quite as sophisticated, and my knowledge was certainly nowhere near that, but it's pretty amazing what they can do with so little.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So our next band is, do you remember this band, the Flower Pot Men?
No.
So this is one of those other ones where I would always hear I would always hear about the Flower Pot Men, like in, like I feel like there was this group of bands that they would mention, like, oh yeah, I played with this band in the Flower Pot Men. They were just one of the bands that always got brought up. And yeah, this band consists of Nick Simper on bass and John Lord on the organ. And they were basically in a band that was backing up this group of 4 singers, typical group of 4 singers. They'd play on a show or whatever, and you wouldn't even see the band. The band wouldn't even be on the stage.
Oh,
They would just be like, because the highlight was on these 4 singers kind of bebopping around. And here is this song called You Can Never Be Wrong, and this is recorded off of French TV. Like the Soul Train of the era, I guess. So as you can see, there these ladies all dancing around. There's 4 guys on stage singing, and not a instrument player in sight. But they were probably just hired hands in this band.
Yeah.
And I guess that's how John Lord and Nick Simper met. And this is very, very poppy, traditional 60s stuff.
This actually makes me think of the early clips in like This Is Spinal Tap, when they were like,
when they were
that's the first thing I thought of when they were in the 60s band. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this almost makes me think like this is fake and somebody made this look old, but it's not.
Totally. No, I could totally see that. See, they've got like 6 backup dancers on the stage and no instruments to be found. But that's the Flower Pot Men, at least the first song by the Flower Pot Men there.
So how did you know that John Lord was in this?
Just did some research, read some
Okay.
websites, and I remember a lot of this stuff because, like we were talking about in the last episode, I would get a hold of the internet, and I would back in the day when you would just have the GeoCities page that was about Deep Purple, and
Mm-hmm.
there'd be like the Deep Purple web ring. You remember web rings? And you'd like
Yeah.
click on the next page or show me a random page, and it would bring you to some other Deep Purple fan page. Maybe this one was on Angel Fire or whatever, or on some like university website with like like a tilde and a like a
Yeah.
big long URL. And I would just bounce around from site to site, just kind of reading and hearing about these, like, oh, the Flower Pot Men, like, but that was 20 plus years ago, and I never really listened to them until this week.
Wow. Because
So
I mean, that could have been anybody back there playing that Partridge Family sounding organ.
exactly, and I'm sure they were just, like John Lord was a well-known organist of the time, and they're like, hey, let's hire him to do an album or whatever. I was reading about how John Lord was played, and it seems like there's some debate about it. John Lord played the organ part for the Kinks and You Really Got Me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was the organ player for that. But there seems to be some debate, and I found a quote by John Lord saying, oh, I played the organ and Jimmy Page played the guitar on that song for You Really Got Me. And then I read a quote from Jimmy Page saying, no, that's not true. He's like, no, I didn't play on that. So it's hard. They weren't really credited they weren't always credited, I should say, in those days. So
Yeah.
it's hard to know what really happened. But according to John Lord, he played the organ on that potentially, or maybe it was piano, I don't know. And Jimmy
Yeah.
Page may or may not have, because, who knows if Jimmy Page is right. Maybe he did and he doesn't know.
Yeah, I mean, what can we really remember from like 20 years ago, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
imagine them.
Imagine, yeah, and we did substantially less drugs than them 20 years ago. So
Yeah, and probably a lot less music too.
yes, yeah,
Overall.
we weren't as prolific. They had a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
So another one from the Flower Pot Men here.
Oh, two.
Yeah, I know, right? So this one is called A Walk in the Sky. It doesn't sound like a huge departure from the other song. December of 1967. Pretty typical stuff. Pretty typical early British pop music.
Kind of hear that plunking Nick Simper bass in the background.
Yeah, I don't know if I can really identify any of the early hallmarks of Deep Purple in this as much as the other songs, but pretty standard stuff. I think we kind of get the idea with.
Yeah, you get the idea. Turn it off.
But in a different departure here, there's a band, another one that I just used to always hear about, which was the Artwoods. I feel like John Lord would always mention them. Oh, the Artwoods. That was like an actual band where he was like an actual member of the band, not just a
hired gun,
hired hand. And so the Artwoods, this is a song called I Feel Good, but not the song I Feel Good that you probably would know. And here we go. Let's get this one going. I get that like fuzzy guitar going on. This is a little bit more. This sounds like it would be a song from like the Austin Powers soundtrack.
Oh man, where's John Lord on that album cover?
No, I was debating. I'm pretty sure he's the one in the middle.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, he doesn't have the big mustache and the sunglasses, so it's always hard to tell. But I'm pretty sure that's him right in the middle there.
Oh man, that overdriven 60s guitar, my God.
It's pretty great. Now this I could get into. I think I could leave the Flower Pot Men, but I'm feeling this fuzz guitar.
Yeah, I mean, I put this on a retro playlist.
Sure. Good drumming there.
Where the hell is John Lord in this?
He's in the background. I wonder if he's gonna come in and do a solo. Let's listen. It's a perfect opportunity right here. There might not be any soloing though. You can just hear that kind of droning organ in the background. Well, there you go.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
That sounds almost like the little piano break and burn. like a very like stripped down like earlier version of that same idea, having the organ come in and play like a little classical interlude. But that I of course don't know, but I would be very willing to bet that part was written by John Lord. At least that part. Some pretty good drumming on this song.
Looking at the album cover here, that I Take What I Want, I've heard that before.
Really?
That was another one on the, I think it was on the Deep Purple Family Album CD.
Oh, okay. So yeah, this is a good one.
I dig this. I like it.
Oh, nice little. I thought they were going to fade out for sure.
Yeah, I remember. Now I think I remember. I Take What I Want, because I can't remember how it goes. It's like, because all I can remember, I don't even know how it goes, but I remember Paul singing it. Not singing it, but like making fun of it.
That sounds
Well,
about
like
right.
he'd be like, "I take what I want, and baby, what I want is you," or something like that.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like a problematic song.
Yeah, and yeah, would it fly these days? I don't know.
Probably not. Especially, I mean, every song in that era was about a girl who was either 16 or 17, which was like always the first line of every song.
Yeah.
Not a good start. So I've got one last song from the Artwoods to close out this whole thing, and it's called "Down in the Valley." It's the last, and this one you can definitely see an early John Lord in the background there, with his sunglasses, traditional sunglasses on the scene.
They make an early appearance.
Yeah. Doesn't look like they're down in a valley. It looks like they're up in an attic. Definitely a little more organ forward though. Got a little driving blues feel to it. I guess this album was called Art Gallery. Drummers smoking, singers smoking.
Everybody's smoking.
Everybody's smoking. Some good organ in this song. Not surprising.
This is good.
Yeah, I'm digging the Artwoods. I would pick up some of their albums. Yeah. Well, it kind of gives you a good idea of where all this was at, where everyone was at. And this kind of brings us to right before Deep Purple or Roundabout formed, all of
Mhm.
the things that were going on, all the different bands and acts that were going on with these 5 guys involved. So
Yeah, kind of cool. Some of the bands, you could hear those influences or styles from the musicians that would creep in later and to Deep Purple albums, and some you couldn't.
I think it's definitely a difference between whether or not, like whether or not they were hired to, and Richie Blackmore, I guess, was a very prolific session guitar player in the
Mhm.
early to mid 60s. So he was on a ton of different albums and played with a ton of different groups. So it's a difference between somebody calling up, picking up the phone and saying, Richie, come play a guitar on the song, and somebody actually being involved in the writing creative process of a band. So I think
Mhm.
that's the difference between something like the Artwoods, where you can hear John Lord being involved, in something like the Flower Pot Men, where he was just playing whatever sheet music they put in front of him or whatever they told him to play.
Yeah.
Because it was obviously not about the organ or about him. It was about those 4 guys on stage.
All right. It probably most likely a paycheck.
Right. So our next that was kind of the history and segment of the show. And now we've got in the news. So last week we talked about Rainbow was going to release Black Sheep of the Family, and since
Mhm.
recording they did. Did you know that?
Oh,
Did you
I
see?
know.
So they did. They released it. They released the Black Sheep of the Family, the new version of Black Sheep of the Family with the new Rainbow, which
Yeah.
we discussed as a little weird. It's just Richie Blackmore with some
People.
new guys. Like, very well, it could be just as easily called Richie Blackmore, but he's calling it Rainbow, and it's his project. So this
Have you
was
heard it?
I have,
Oh, we
and
got it.
this is posted on their this was posted on their stuff on April 26th, I think, on Facebook.
Okay.
Again, kind of curious why now, why the song's 43, well, the Rainbow version's like 43 years old, and it's been almost 50 years since the original. Sounds like the guy's channeling some Dio.
Yeah, a little bit.
So we talked about the original Rainbow version in the last episode, which is actually a cover of a Quatermass song. So that's the Richie Black. That's the 2019 version. This is the 1975 version. A little bit more cowbell in the beginning, it sounds like. So again, not anything too crazy. And then we've got the original version by Quatermass.
Oh.
And this one starts off with some wacky. Oh, could you see that when I pulled that up?
Whoa.
Can you see my show notes here?
No.
No. Okay, good. So this is Quatermass in 1970, who is John Gustafson, who you may know.
Wow.
Singing right here and playing bass. He would later play bass for Ian Gillan Band. He also sang Watch Out for the Bat and the Butterfly Ball.
Okay.
So he's incredible. He's an incredible bass player and an incredible singer. And then on drums you got Mick Underwood, who would later play with Gillan and a bunch of other acts. And then a keyboardist, J. Peter Robinson, who I'm not familiar with. Just a power trio. That sounds pretty, pretty faithful cover, other than the like kind of weird synthy intro there. Everyone kind of stayed pretty faithful to that song.
Yeah, I'd say that between the three of them, the newest version kind of had the tightest arrangement, whereas the Dio version had a really kind of loose, felt like a very loose kind of arrangement. But I didn't really hate the new one. I didn't
No,
really hate the 2019 version. It sounded pretty like it was trying to be modern.
right. It's faithful to, it's faithful to the original Rainbow version, which is fairly faithful to the Quatermass version, but it also kind of begs the question. It still just makes me scratch my head. Why are you doing this now? It's just
Yeah,
if
exactly.
you're gonna get Rainbow back together, why not do some new stuff? Like, it's strange to do it just a version of a song from your debut album of 40 plus years ago,
Yeah.
and
It wasn't even your most well-known song.
wasn't your most well-known song. And it wasn't even your song to begin with. It was a cover. So I mean, I get that. Apparently, he likes that song, and it's a good song, but it's interesting.
Mm.
So in the news, we've also got that, interestingly, Deep Purple is going to be, believe it or not, are working on a new album.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're these guys right here are putting together a new album in 2019. So
Well,
I
look at
mean,
these guys.
they're pretty prolific. These guys, you can't stop them.
Nope. They might stop touring, but it doesn't look like they're going to stop recording.
No, it's great.
Which is the good thing about some of these bands retiring, at least from touring, is that they're not really going away, because if they could still do it, um, they could still release music, which is kind of cool. And I like the fact that these guys are still releasing new music too, even though later on, hopefully, we'll get to hearing some of it, or um, assigning ourselves a task because of hearing more of it, because I certainly haven't, but I still think it's cool.
Right. Yeah. And I'm definitely not very well versed in their stuff. I remember I had bought Perpendicular. I think that came out in like 97 or something.
Yeah, me too.
I think we both bought it because we were both hanging out a lot at that time.
Yeah.
And we kind of picked that up, and I listened to it a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you one song off of that right now.
No, but it was yeah, I mean, it was pretty good. I definitely want to listen to it again with fresh ears.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got, look at this, David Coverdale and Ian Gillan apparently are in this
Wow.
new issue of Sweden Rock, which we can't read because it's in Swedish.
Well, Coverdale's all over the place now. This is great.
Yeah, Coverdale. I did set up some like news alerts with Google, and it seems like Coverdale is the one that comes up all the time. And sometimes, like we talked about, it's on some of those gossip sites, like, you won't believe what Coverdale said about Richie
Uh,
Blackmore, and and then you read it and he's like, hey, Richie Blackmore should, it's always some like really tame thing that they make sound like, is you trying to make these guys in their 70s fight each other? Like, why are you dragging,
it would be amusing, it's just like, come here, you.
like they always make, yeah, they're just, they make it sound so much worse than it is. Like,
Yeah.
he said he would never ever again work with Deep Purple, and you read the actual quote and it's like, well, I worked with them before, I don't know why we'd do it again. And very mild. And I find Coverdale, I saw him and Glenn Hughes, I think it was their acceptance speech at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something, and just
Yeah.
the two guys could not be more charming, and like the two of them were like kind of like on stage like a comedy act, like Abbott and Costello up there, just like making jokes and like like old friends, and they both,
Yeah.
you can definitely see it. It was hard to, when you read about like, wow, David Coverdale came from out of nowhere, all of a sudden he's on stage at the California Jam in front of like 250,000 people, as like one of his first shows with the
Yeah.
band. Like, but when you see him, like, I mean, he must have always been that charismatic. You can understand why he was so successful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I would love. I wish that him and Glenn Hughes would tour together, do an album together, or something like that. But I think they had asked on an episode of Eddie Trunk recently. He interviews David Coverdale a lot, and he asked him about that because he's also had a recent interview with Glenn Hughes, and I think he asked them both about that. And they love each other, but I think maybe conflicting projects or schedules. But man, that would be something to see. I would see that in a second.
Oh, absolutely. So we've got our we're gonna try this segment. We tried to do it last time and we couldn't get the audio working. So now we're gonna try this again, which is I have right here a song that is by somebody associated with Deep Purple. But I'm not going to tell you who. And I want you to tell me, I'm going to start playing it, what you think about it, who it could possibly be that is involved, whether either directly or tangentially with Deep Purple. So I'm going to start this up.
Oh boy.
And my goal is that hopefully there's like listeners someday and they're like, oh, I know who it is. And it's going to drive them crazy that we can't figure it out. Well, I can figure it out, but I would never have guessed in a million years.
I like it.
Yeah, actually, I do too. When I heard this, I thought it sounded like it was right up your alley.
You are not wrong.
So any thoughts? Like, what do you think? Who do you think it could possibly be?
Well, the vocalist is definitely channeling Axl Rose, or vice versa.
Yeah, maybe vice versa, depending on the.
Oh, this is tough. Well, I feel like it's like mid to late 70s.
Okay, mid to late 70s.
I feel like John Lord might be involved, or Blackmore.
Okay.
The guitar kind of denies that, but or maybe, I don't know. No, it doesn't sound like Richie.
No, I think you're right there.
I'm changing my mind.
Okay, so we're saying the late 70s. We're thinking John Lord.
Oh, that's got to be Richie.
Now there's kind of like, sounds like dual guitars there. Sounds almost like is it Detroit Rock City? Like the guitars like in Detroit Rock City?
Yeah.
I don't know. Can you hear Richie Blackmore playing a guitar solo along somebody else?
No.
So.
Oh, man. Well, one thing I'm sure is that it's 70s. It's got to be in the 70s, like mid 70s.
You are right. It's 1979.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking like definitely mid 70s, like mid to late.
It is 1979. You nailed it with that.
Is Richie in it?
Richie is not in it.
Shit. Well, somebody's doing a damn good Richie impersonation on like the first solo.
Yeah, and I don't think the first time I listened, I don't think I really listened that closely, but it is a very good Richie impression.
Well, John Lord or Roger Glover?
Nope. I'll give you a hint. It is tied into the fact that we're talking about early Deep Purple in this episode.
Was it Nick Semper?
It is Nick Semper.
Wow.
Very good. This is a band that we would always bring up when we were like talking about random Deep Purple things that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
Semper's Fandango.
Wow, really?
Remember that?
Yeah, because we thought it was the most hilarious name for a band ever.
We would always say, Nick Semper's Fandango. Ha ha ha. And we didn't.
Nick Semper, Olay, you know? Like, this is actually really good.
It is, right? I actually kind of I was very surprised. I thought for my first one, I was like, I want to throw Nick Semper's Fandango at him because I thought it would be funny. And I had never heard anything by them, but I heard this song and I was like, wow. I heard like one or two other songs and this was one I wanted to go with. And I thought, wow, like that's actually, I never gave them any credit, but I also had never listened to them, you know, and you're like 16 or whatever. And you're like, haha, that's stupid thing. And
yeah, pretty much.
You don't give it any respect or any thought. You're just like, that's dumb.
Because when you're a kid, you're like, I don't know anything about that. It's stupid automatically.
Exactly. That's a stupid band, but actually pretty good. So it features.
That's something I would listen to in my car. That's something I would play again.
It is. It's good. It's so it's from the album. It's called. I'm sorry. The song is called Rocky Road Blues.
Mm-hmm.
It's from the album Slipstreaming, released in 1979. It's got James Proops on vocals, Pete Parks on guitar, Nick Semper on bass, Neil MacArthur on keyboards, and Ron Penny on drums.
Wow. Well, I mean, I was really torn because the guitar tone didn't sound anything like Richie, but then the first solo did, and then I heard the little like piano thing, and I'm like, is that John Lord back there trying to fake me out? So he's like, it's like he like got a bunch of guys together and said like, try and do impersonations of like Deep Purple guys.
Yeah,
in this song, and it's not bad.
No, not at all. The guitar is like too dirty to be Richie, but the style of playing is very like the tone is too dirty, I should say. The style of playing is kind of dead on,
which is odd because I don't know, it's just very curious choices. Like he was probably trying to piggyback off their success.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, apparently he was in a band before that too. Like that wasn't even his first band out of Deep Purple.
Yeah.
In a band called Warhorse, which I have not actually listened to any of, but listening to this, I would definitely want to give it a shot.
But yeah, there's nothing wrong with. I mean, if that's what he was doing, if he said, "Hey guys, try and sound like my old band," they broke up a few years ago, and I want to try and cash in on some of that success. But
exactly.
If he was basically just like, yeah, Richie won't work with me, so can you play like him because I love that style of music? I don't know, that maybe he was doing that. Who knows? But either way, it's definitely a good song. I like it.
So what do you think about that segment? Should we do that again?
Yeah.
I think it was good.
Yeah, especially because you're throwing ones at me like Nick Semper's Fandango, which I haven't thought about in like 20 years probably.
So yeah, I don't have our first episode of the podcast came out this morning, and we're recording episode 2 today. So we haven't had a ton of feedback about the episode. We've got the last I checked, we had 17 listens today.
Some from Canada.
Yeah, we have an international audience. Someone in Canada.
That's awesome.
So yeah, somebody who there was somebody from Nova Scotia who liked something on Instagram or something. So I'm thinking that might be our listener. I don't even know if they listen. They might have subscribed, or I don't even know how it keeps track of those things. But
Nice.
but pretty interesting. Again, not really doing it for the listen so much as just kind of real fun talking about this stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of like when I go to a Kiss Expo. I can definitely know that I'm bumping into people that are going to want to talk about Kiss, because it certainly doesn't happen in my everyday life. So
Right. Yeah.
that's what this is every week, you know?
Yeah, I could I can talk at my wife about Deep Purple, and she's a very nice lady, and she'll listen and say, okay. And she does, there are some things like she's into with them, but definitely she's not going to want to talk with me for an hour about Deep Purple once a week. That might be asking a little much.
But what what I enjoy about that'll test the bounds of your matrimony.
Exactly.
But what I like about this is it's not just about Deep Purple. Is even before the show, what did we bring up? Motley Crue. We brought up Iron Maiden. We brought up I brought up Kiss. You know, we just brought up a whole bunch of different bands that made us, that sprung from this, and like comparisons. Pink Floyd, the Beatles. We just, because all these scenarios make us think of like our other favorite bands, which it's all kind of the same family of music. It's all classic rock at this point.
Yeah, and a lot of it British. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's all we got for this week. You have any closing remarks, or?
I'm gonna go look for Nick Simper's Fandango now, so I can listen to it on the way to work tomorrow.
Yeah, I was thinking I'll put a link in the show notes, but I was like, I don't think I should, because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But if you're listening and you really like that, check out Nick Simper's Fandango. There's actually, I think, one of those like albums you can buy on Amazon that's 2 albums in one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's got like they'd sell all those CDs, I remember, and you go to the bargain bin and it'd be like 2 albums from a band on 1 CD. I think so. Yep. It's like a double album sort of thing from that. So I definitely want to check out some more Nick Simper's Fandango too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, until next week then, I will bid you adieu and keep on listening to that Purple.
Yeah, and that. Word.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
All right. Good night.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also give us a rating on iTunes to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.